Hello, let me know where you're from in the world and what time it is after liking this video. There's a death row inmate who we've executed over a dozen times. He won't stay dead. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18th, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. "Up and at 'em, cowpoke," he called in that mocking tone. "Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a—" Billy. Warden Taft silenced him with a word. "If you can't act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out." Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. "Nah," he muttered. "This a show I can't miss." Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked him to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done, or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls. Well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry. The warden, his closest men, the thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections, the prison physician, the families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning, we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. "Good morning, sirs," he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it. I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You're not... You're supposed to be..." "I don't know what you mean, sir." He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. "You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me?" Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? "Jesus Christ," Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. "It's Billy." I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. "I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation." "Oh." "At 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time." There was a long pause, And when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. And well, it, uh, it didn't work. I blinked. It didn't... What? There came a long sigh. Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself. And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18, 1999. Unofficially, they'd tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the COs who'd once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear, but how could I not now sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandoned me. I winced. Number no, Glass. I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay, Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. It? The thing standing behind you. I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let's take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh? You here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not. It's freedom. The only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way, if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass, but you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time, leaning in so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear my heart stopped beating, and my blood froze in place in my veins, and it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't think, I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air, and my vision blurred, and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then, and come storming into the room. Later they showed me the tapes from the security camera, There'd been nothing behind me, nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder, nothing at all. On May 7th, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, via hanging, or so I heard, in some government black site somewhere, far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate. Really, because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. "Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez?" I shook my head, and he sighed. Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of Fifth Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them, and childhood memories, and all that. Everybody deserves justice, no matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force, got the case reopened, found the guy, and I watched him fry. And I like to imagine she was there watching too as he burned. There was a tense moment, and then a chuckle. Of course, after that bullet to the hip in '71, I couldn't walk the beat anymore. But I've been just as happy here, watching justice be served. It makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order to the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. "I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally going to retire, Mendez," he confessed. "After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice?" I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? "He'll die, sir," I promised. "It'll work this time, it has to." But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression, as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes, haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed, and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized, and with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue. And even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while, I screamed myself hoarse. "Help! Somebody, please! Jesus Christ, we need help in here!" But nobody came. And all of a sudden, some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle. Eyes wide, round, and bloated tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my co-workers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black, or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass. No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay? Silence. I take a deep breath. How old are you, Glass? I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. I am old, child. His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and all were equally ancient. Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it. I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. Why did you do what you did to those girls? Just so I could feel something again, he whispered. Anything. Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt? Remorse? You ask that of me? Me who has watched empires rise and fall. He almost sounded amused. Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by, essentially, identical stock, and in greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I myself covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing. And suddenly, he stood from his chair, as if he'd never been restrained at all. A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez. I stared up at him in disbelief. How did you... But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. You owe me a death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt. I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe. It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead, I could just feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago, and every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood, and it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements. And then the both us just sit there, staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking, for an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky, that my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been unpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all. But they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's for research. I'm sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as Glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3rd, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song, when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23rd, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavilon and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere. And yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently, he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not going to let me walk away from this. Not while I still owe him a debt. But I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from that blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know. Practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients. And I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I'm slipping into madness, or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror, to finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing. I have to pay what I owe, even if it kills me. Something's wrong with the kid I babysat. His toy bear smiled at me. Some jobs aren't worth the money. Some jobs take more from you than they give. I learned that the hard way. At the time, I was desperate. College tuition was draining my bank account faster than I could keep up, and my part-time job barely covered food and rent. Every time I checked my balance, it felt like a punch to the gut. Bills kept piling up, and no matter how many extra shifts I picked up, I was always falling behind. I needed a side job, fast, something easy, quick, and preferably well-paying. No complicated interviews, no weeks of waiting for a paycheck, just instant cash. That's when I stumbled upon the ad. Wanted. Babysitter for one night. Pays $500. Must follow instructions carefully. $500 for a single night? That was insane. Too good to be true, really. Babysitting usually paid what, $15 an hour at best? My first instinct told me there had to be a catch. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some kind of scam. But then I thought about my empty fridge, my overdue internet bill, and the fact that I had about $20 to my name. I wasn't in a position to be picky. Without overthinking it, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number listed in the ad. The phone barely rang twice before someone picked up. A woman. Her voice was cold, distant, completely void of warmth, like she was reading off a script. Be here by 7 p.m. sharp. No guests, no phone calls. She said. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask any of the 100 questions running through my mind, but the line went dead before I could get a single word out. No introduction, no small talk, nothing. Just an address and a set of rules. That should have been my first red flag. Who hires a total stranger without even asking basic questions? No, do you have experience? No, have you worked with kids before? Just instructions. But $500 for a few hours of babysitting? No way was I passing that up. I drove to the house and arrived. The house was massive, not just big, mansion big. It stood at the very end of a long, deserted road, surrounded by nothing but empty land and thick, shadowy trees. No neighbors, no streetlights. Just a cracked, lonely pavement leading up to an eerie, towering house. A single porch light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the front door. The whole place looked straight out of one of those horror movies I usually avoided. Something about it made me hesitate. The silence, the stillness, the way the windows loomed like dark, empty eyes. I took a breath, shaking off the creeping unease, and walked up the steps. My knuckles barely brushed against the wood when the door creaked open, like someone had been standing behind it waiting for me. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, painfully thin, with sharp features that made his hollowed-out face look even more severe. Deep, dark circles pooled under his sunken eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks, maybe months. Despite his exhaustion, his suit was crisp, perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. Behind him, a woman hovered stiffly, her posture so rigid she looked like she might shatter. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles bone white, like she was holding on to something for dear life. The man's gaze locked onto mine. His voice was flat, mechanical. "You're the babysitter?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah." The woman stepped forward before I could say anything else and shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand. "These are the instructions." I glanced down at it, but didn't open it yet. Something about their urgency made my stomach twist. "So, where's the kid?" I asked, forcing a small smile. Neither of them answered. The woman didn't even blink. She just turned on her heel, grabbed her coat, and started toward the door. "We'll be back by sunrise," she said quickly. "Follow the rules and you'll be fine." And then, before I could ask anything else, they were gone. The door shut behind them with a quiet but firm click. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the piece of paper in my hand, my unease growing by the second. Why had they left so quickly? Why did this whole thing feel wrong? Finally, I looked down at the list. The paper was old, slightly crumpled, and covered in tight, neat handwriting, each letter carefully formed, as if someone had taken painstaking effort to make sure every word was clear. It wasn't printed, no official babysitting instructions, just a handwritten list. It wasn't rushed or scribbled. It was deliberate, like whoever wrote it needed me to understand. My eyes skimmed over the rules, my stomach twisting with each one. Rule number 1, put Timmy to bed by 8:30 p.m. If he asks for a bedtime story, only read from the green book on his shelf. Do not read any other book aloud. Okay, strict, but fine. Maybe it was a sentimental book or something. Rule number 2, lock all doors and windows before 9 p.m. If you hear scratching at the back door, do not investigate. I blinked. What? That was weird. Why would there be scratching? A raccoon? A stray cat? Rule number 3, do not answer the phone after 11 p.m. My pulse quickened. Why? Who would be calling? And why would I need to ignore it? Rule number 4, if Timmy tells you someone is outside his window, do not look. Tell him, "Go to sleep, Timmy. Do not say anything else." Okay. That was officially creepy. Rule number 5, if you hear footsteps upstairs while Timmy is asleep, ignore them. Whatever you do, do not go upstairs. A lump formed in my throat. Footsteps? But there shouldn't be anyone else in the house. Rule number 6, at 11:33 p.m., the kitchen door will open on its own. Do not close it. Do not look inside. Let it remain open until 11:42 p.m. My hands felt clammy. I wiped them on my jeans. Rule number 7, if you hear a child giggling from the second floor, ignore it. The boy you are babysitting is asleep. I swallowed hard. My eyes darted back to the top of the list, rereading every rule, hoping maybe I had misunderstood something. But the words were still there, clear as day. Rule number 8, if you wake up on the couch and don't remember falling asleep, leave the house immediately. Do not look back. I let out a nervous laugh, a dry, humorless sound. This had to be a joke, right? A prank? Maybe the parents were just messing with me. Some weird rich people humor I didn't understand. Then I heard a voice. Are you my new babysitter? I jumped, my heart slamming into my ribs as I spun around. A little boy stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring at me with wide, tired eyes. He couldn't have been older than 6. His blonde hair was messy, sticking up in different directions like he'd been tossing and turning in bed. He wore pajamas, soft blue ones covered in tiny stars. I forced a smile, trying to steady my breathing. Yeah, you must be Timmy. He nodded. Did my mom give you the rules? He asked. Something about the way he asked sent a chill up my spine. His tone wasn't casual or curious. It was serious. My stomach twisted. Yeah. His expression darkened. His small fingers tightened on the banister. You have to follow them. I stared at him, unable to respond. His voice was quiet, but there was a weight behind it, something heavy, something that made my skin crawl. I shook off the unease, forcing myself to focus. It was just a kid, just a weird set of rules. Nothing was going to happen. I led Timmy upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. His room was small and tidy, with a little twin bed and a row of stuffed animals lined up against the wall. Everything was neatly arranged, like it hadn't been touched in a while. As I pulled the blanket over him, he whispered, "Don't forget to lock the doors and windows." I nodded quickly, not wanting to show my discomfort. "I won't. Get some sleep, okay?" He didn't answer. He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to decide if he could trust me. Then finally just turned over, hugging a stuffed bear to his chest, and he closed his eyes. As soon as his breathing evened out, I left the room and made my way through the house, double-checking every door, every window. The locks clicked into place one by one, until I was sure everything was secure. I had just finished locking the back door when I heard it. A faint scratching. I froze. The sound was soft but deliberate. A slow, dragging scrape, like fingernails running over the wood. My breath caught in my throat. A cold chill ran down my spine as my eyes flicked toward the paper still clutched in my hand. Rule number 2. If you hear scratching at the back door, do not investigate. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to check, just to make sure it wasn't, I don't know, a tree branch or an animal. But something deep inside me knew better. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. Just walk away. Ignore it. It's nothing. Slowly, I forced my legs to move, stepping away from the door. The scratching continued behind me, steady and patient, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. Minutes passed. The scratching continued, slow and rhythmic, until finally, it stopped. I let out a shaky breath. I spent the next hour glued to my phone, scrolling through social media mindlessly, trying to drown out the silence. But the quiet was suffocating. The whole house felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every creak, every shift in the floorboards made my heart pound. I forced myself to check the clock. Then at exactly 11 p.m., the house phone rang. I froze. I jolted so hard my phone nearly slipped from my hands. The old landline sat on the wall near the kitchen. Its shrill, piercing ring shattered the silence, echoing through the dimly lit living room, sharp and unrelenting. My breath hitched. Rule number 3. Do not answer the phone after 11 p.m. I turned my head slowly, my gaze landing on the old-fashioned phone sitting on the small table across the room. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. The ringing didn't stop. It just kept going, over and over, like whoever was on the other end wasn't going to give up. The ringing was insistent, demanding, like it knew I was here. It rang again, and again, and again. I turned my back to it, gripping my phone in my hands, trying to ignore it. Just a few more seconds, and it would stop. Each ring made my stomach clench tighter. My fingers twitched. My breathing came fast and shallow. What would happen if I answered? Who would be on the other end? I squeezed my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Ignore it. Just ignore it. Seconds dragged on like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ringing cut off. Silence. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to relax. But just as my shoulders sagged, "Miss?" My stomach plummeted. I spun around so fast my vision blurred. Timmy stood at the bottom of the staircase. His small hands gripped the railing tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with fear. His face was pale, his lower lip trembling. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There's someone outside my window." My blood ran cold. Rule number 4 flashed in my mind. If Timmy tells you someone is outside his window, do not look. Tell him, "Go to sleep, Timmy." Do not say anything else. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, Timmy. Go to sleep." Timmy didn't move right away. His small fingers gripped the banister, knuckles turning pale. His lip quivered as he shifted on his feet. But he's staring at me. A chill spread through my body, icy and slow. My instincts screamed at me to run upstairs, to check, to look, but I knew I couldn't. The rules were clear. I forced a weak smile, even though my hands were shaking. "Go to sleep, Timmy." His wide eyes flicked toward the hallway, and for a second I thought he was going to argue. His little body trembled, a quiet fear radiating from him like static electricity. But then slowly he nodded. Without another word, he turned and padded back toward his room. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. Then, Timmy asked suddenly, "Are you scared?" My breath caught. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering in my ears. Timmy was still sitting upright in bed. He shouldn't have been. I had just tucked him in, just watched him lay down. But there he was, sitting silently, watching me. His pale face seemed even paler under the dim glow of his nightlight. He was small for his age, fragile-looking, with dark circles under his eyes. I forced out a short, nervous chuckle. "Of what?" Timmy didn't blink. He didn't answer. Instead, in a quiet, almost pleading voice, he whispered, "Don't close the kitchen door." A cold, twisting fear coiled in my stomach. I pressed my lips together and nodded. "Okay." I left his room and shut the door behind me, firm but gentle, careful not to make a sound. I could still feel his gaze, burning into my back. I didn't check the window. I couldn't check the window. My legs carried me downstairs on autopilot, though every step felt heavier, harder to take. I tried to shake off the nerves, tried to convince myself this was all in my head. I was trying to calm the wild pounding in my chest, just make it through the night. The rules were just weird rules, right? The parents were strict, maybe paranoid. Maybe they had a reason for all of this. Maybe I was just overthinking. I settled onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around myself, my hands clenched tight in the fabric. I glanced at the clock, 11:32 p.m. My stomach twisted. My fingers gripped the blanket tighter. And then, 11:33 p.m. A long, low creak echoed through the house. My body went rigid. The kitchen door swung open. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. A deep, suffocating darkness seeped out from the doorway, too dark, stretching like ink bleeding into the air. The doorway itself looked wrong somehow, like it was pulling further away, stretching longer than it should have been. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look inside. Let it remain open until 11:42 p.m. I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers. The screen glowed in the darkness. 7 minutes left. That was all. 7 minutes. Just wait. Just sit still. Then, from the darkness, I heard breathing. Not mine. Not Timmy's. Something else. It was deep and slow, a wet, rasping inhale, followed by an even slower exhale. I pressed my back against the couch, my nails digging into my palms. My whole body was tense, every muscle locked in place. The breathing got louder, closer, so close I could almost feel it against my skin. A shudder crawled up my spine. My phone screen flickered. 11:41 p.m. Almost there. Just one more minute. The breath hitched, like it was shifting, moving. The clock finally struck 11:42 p.m. The sound stopped. I opened my eyes and looked. The kitchen door was closed. My chest heaved as I sucked in a shaky breath. My lungs burned, like I'd been holding it in for too long. My fingers, still clenched into fists, slowly unfurled, the movement stiff and reluctant. When I glanced down, my palms were marked with deep, crescent-shaped indentations where my nails had dug in too deep. A sharp sting ran through them, but I barely registered the pain. It was over, for now. I checked the time again, 11:43 p.m. The house was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought relief. It was the kind that pressed down on you, thick and suffocating, like something unseen was still there, lurking just beyond sight, watching, waiting. I stayed on the couch, refusing to move. My body was still coiled tight, my muscles aching from the tension. I tried to focus on my breathing, to slow my racing pulse, to convince myself that everything was fine. But my heart barely had time to slow before I heard a child's giggle. The sound came from upstairs. I went completely still. My eyes darted to the baby monitor on the coffee table. The small screen showed Timmy's bed. He was there, asleep, not moving. The giggling got louder. It wasn't him. My throat tightened. Rule number 6. If you hear a child giggling from the second floor, ignore it. The boy you are babysitting is asleep. I clenched my hands into fists, nails biting into my skin. Ignore it. Just ignore it. The giggling stopped. For a moment, the house was silent again. Then, from behind the couch, a whisper came. "You're no fun." A cold rush of terror flooded my veins. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stayed perfectly still, my body locked in place, waiting. The silence stretched on. I sat there frozen, until the house felt normal again. I exhaled shakily, barely realizing I'd been holding my breath. My chest ached, my muscles weak from how tense I had been. I forced myself to check the clock, my body sagging in relief. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. See? Nothing happened. I followed the rules and nothing happened. Everything was fine. And then I heard soft footsteps, upstairs. I went rigid. I was on the couch. Timmy was asleep in his room. I had checked. I had seen him. But I could hear them. Slow, deliberate, measured steps pressing against the wooden floor above me, moving with an eerie patience. I gripped the armrest, my fingers digging into the fabric. Rule number 5. If you hear footsteps upstairs while Timmy is asleep, ignore them. Do not go upstairs. I squeezed my eyes shut, breathing through my nose. Ignore it. It's just noise. Just a house settling. I clamped a hand over my mouth, choking back the instinct to scream. Ignore it. Just ignore it. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back harder into the couch, as if that would somehow shield me from whatever was up there. My whole body trembled, a cold sweat slicking my skin. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved again, slow, deliberate, pacing, back and forth, just above me. My mind raced. Who, or what, was up there? Number. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to find out. A floorboard creaked. The steps were moving, down the hall, toward Timmy's room. A sharp, icy panic tore through my chest. I wanted to run, to throw open his door and grab him, but I couldn't. The rules. Follow the rules. Then I heard a whisper. "Miss, why didn't you listen?" A shudder rippled through me. My vision blurred. My chest ached, like the air was too thick, too heavy. My fingers trembled as I rubbed my eyes. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I kept my eyes shut tight, forcing myself to block out the sound. Don't react. Don't acknowledge it. Seconds dragged into minutes, each one stretching unbearably long. And then the footsteps stopped. Silence. Darkness swallowed me whole. The dizziness hit me hard. like something had sucked all the energy from my body in an instant. For a moment, maybe longer, I was weightless, drifting in a void of nothingness. There was no sound, no sensation, just an endless, suffocating emptiness. My mind felt disconnected from my body, like I was floating in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. My head swam, my limbs felt weak, and then I collapsed. The world faded to black. I don't remember dreaming. I don't remember anything at all. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up. In Timmy's bed. My entire body turned to ice. The sheets beneath me were soft. The air smelled faintly of dust and something stale. Wrong. I bolted upright, my pulse slamming against my ribs. No, no, no. Rule number 7. If you wake up somewhere other than the couch, immediately leave the house without looking behind you. I sat up, frozen, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gulps. The air around me felt thick, heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no cars outside. Just a deep, swallowing silence. The mattress dipped. Suddenly, from the darkness behind me, a voice whispered, "Emily, where are you going?" Something was in bed with me. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I did not turn around. I forced my body to move, inch by inch. My hands trembled as I pushed the blanket off. My feet touched the cold floor. Behind me, the presence shifted. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Don't run, don't panic. And my decision was already made. I was leaving. Not just this house. Not just this job. This town. I packed what little I had, stuffing my bag with trembling hands. No goodbyes. No explanations. I didn't want to explain. Because I didn't understand. And worse, I didn't want to. I stood. I walked forward. I kept my head down as I stepped outside. The floor creaked under my steps. Behind me, footsteps followed. Software. Slow. Playful. I reached the hallway. The footsteps quickened. A breath, cold and damp, brushed the back of my neck. I ran. I hit the stairs, skipping steps, my legs burning as I pushed forward. The footsteps behind me pounded faster, matching my speed. I reached the front door, my fingers scrambling over the lock. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my keys. I yanked the door open. The cold night air hit me like a wave. I sprinted outside, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop, not until I reached my car. Only then did I turn back, gasping for breath, my hands still shaking. The house was dark, the front door still wide open. Something stood in the doorway, watching, waiting. I didn't stay to find out what. The next morning, as I looked at my purse, I noticed Timmy's bear inside my bag. I had to return it no matter what. I couldn't keep it. My hands still trembled as I dialed the number from the babysitting ad. It rang once, twice. Then, someone picked up. A man's voice, not the father's, not the mother's. "This is Officer Daniels." I hesitated. I was trying to reach the family that lives at... I gave him the address, my voice unsteady. Silence. Then, in a careful, measured voice, the officer asked, "Who are you trying to reach?" I told him the couple's names. Another long pause. A cold, sinking dread settled in my stomach. Then finally the officer spoke. His voice was quiet, cautious. "That house has been abandoned for 20 years. My mouth went dry. "No," I whispered. "I was there. I babysat their son." The line was silent for so long that I thought we had been disconnected. Then the officer exhaled, a slow, careful breath. "There was a little boy that lived there once." I gripped my phone tighter. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. "But he died in 2003. The call cut off. I stared at my phone, my chest rising and falling too fast. Then I felt it, a shift in the air, the tiny creeping sensation of being watched. Slowly, stiffly, I turned my head. I looked at the bear. It wasn't the same anymore. Then I swear, I saw it smiling at me. I just found my wife outside and I'm sitting here freaking out. It's 3:17 a.m. and I just found my wife outside. This is going to be a mess as I'm still shaking, but let me explain it as best I can. So a bunch of years ago, we lived in another house. One night I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard noises coming from the other half of the house. I quietly opened the bedroom door and immediately saw a light on in my wife's study, which was situated next to the kitchen. The house we lived in was a few blocks away from the bad neighborhood, so my immediate thought was that someone had broken in and was going through the stuff in my wife's room, as my wife had come to bed with me several hours prior, and as far as I knew, she was still in bed. I crept through the house and was ready to confront the person in the room when I realized that it was my wife. In my still half-asleep state, I just assumed she was still in bed. Turns out she had woken up, couldn't get back to sleep, and so went to her room to browse Facebook or whatever for a while. I had almost confronted my own wife thinking she was a burglar. Now in our current house we have a screen door and a wooden door. The wooden door has a deadbolt on it, and you have to make sure that you take the house keys with you, because if you close the wooden door, you're not getting back in unless you grab the hidden spare key or knock on the door window to be let back in. So it's about an hour ago, I'm woken up by the front door rattling. I immediately grab my phone and pull up the security camera located right by the front door. To my surprise, I see my wife standing there, kind of shivering. It's definitely her because we've been married over a decade, and I know what my own wife looks like. She's dressed in the same clothing she wore today, a red top and black pants. Used to her. I don't know what she's doing outside, but she is. Confused, I roll over and there's my wife fast asleep. Remembering the incident in our last place, I use my phone screen to shine a light on her and confirm that it's definitely her and she's definitely in the bed. At this point, I'm really confused. I get up and make my way through the house to the front door. As I walk into the lounge room, our cat looks up at me, half asleep. Normally, she's super curious about stuff going on outside, and I would have thought that hearing the screen door rattling would have caused her to be at the door trying to see what's going on, but it's as if she hasn't heard a thing. I stand by the door and call out, "Who is it?" "It's me. Hurry up and let me back in. I'm freezing. I went outside because I heard something, but forgot to take the keys in my bag with me." That absolutely sounds like my wife. Accent, intonation, knowledge about where her set of keys are, everything. But I'm not convinced, because I've just seen her sleeping in the bed with my own eyes. "Hold on a second," I tell her. Now I'm heading back through the house and into the bedroom. I wake up my wife and say, "This is really fucking weird, you have to see this." I open the camera app and show her the front door. She's still at the door looking around, wondering what I'm doing, because all I need to do to let her back in is turn the handle on the deadbolt and open the door. My wife says, "What the fuck? When was that recorded?" I tell her it's not. This is live. You're standing outside by the front door. I just went down there and asked who it was, and your voice told me it was you and that I should let you back in because you're freezing and you left your keys in your bag. My wife gets up and peers through the bedroom window, as you can just see the front door alcove from there. She gasps and pulls the curtains shut. She turns around and I'll never forget the look on her face as long as I live. She's terrified. "That's me," she says. At this point, I'm freaked the fuck out. I'm wide awake. I'm speaking to my wife, and I'm physically touching her while trying to peer out the window with her. But there she is, standing outside in the very outfit she wore today. Same hair, same glasses, same everything. We walk into the lounge room and I grab the big torch I have. It's a big, sturdy metal, super bright light, great for blinding people and hitting them if they get too close. We stand by the door again. "What's your name?" I ask. She tells me her full name, including her middle name. It's correct. "What's your birth date?" She tells me. It's also correct. "What did we have for dinner tonight?" She tells me this too and tells me that I cooked it. This is right too. I can hear my real wife standing next to me, trying to control her breathing as she's scared out of her wits. I nudge her and whisper, "Ask her something only you would know." After a moment to steady herself and think of something, she speaks. "When we last stayed with my parents, what change had Dad made to my old room?" There was a pause. "Who is that?" the person outside said. "Why aren't you letting me in?" "You know it's me. You're starting to freak me out here." "Who is that inside with you? Is that a recording of me? What's going on here?" I said, "Answer the question. What change had been made to your room when we last visited?" Another pause, then finally, there was a second bed added, as Max and Damien, my brother-in-law's two kids, sleep in there while visiting Mom and Dad. There's an audible gasp from my wife next to me. Now we're both freaked out. I grab her hand and lead her back into the bedroom and turn the lights on. We're still awake, watching the cameras. The other person walked towards the backyard, presumably to grab the spare key, but that was about 40 minutes ago and I haven't seen them since. I'm too shit scared to go to bed because I'm scared that this person, who knew everything about my wife, will find the spare key and enter. I don't know who the fuck they really are or what they want, but I'm not sleeping. My sister discovered a universal language, but she hasn't spoken a word since 2003. My sister is a genius. When she was about 13, she made this device that honestly still blows my mind. I've spent my entire life studying physics, and I still don't know what she did or how, which is probably for the best, considering how this all played out. I don't know how she did it, but what I do know is in the summer of 2003, the laws governing matter and atomic mass didn't seem to affect her anymore. She was invisible to the human eye, and she was speaking a universal language we've never been able to identify or reproduce. Before I get into this, though, have you ever seen Firefly? Allow me to quote, "I am very smart. I went to the best Medicate in Osiris, top 3% of my class, finished my internship in 8 months. Gifted is the term. So when I tell you that my little sister makes me look like an idiot child, I want you to understand my full meaning. This could have been written about me and my sisters. We come from a long line of gifted people. My father is a neurologist, my mother works for SpaceX, and my eldest sister is an artist whose work has been featured in galleries since she was 12. I'm a full-time research associate of high-energy density physics at a university I can't name without risking my career. And like Simon Tam from Firefly before me, I don't tell you all of this to flaunt our intelligence or to make us look special. I tell you this so you can fully understand what I mean when I say Nirali made us all look like idiot children. In 2003, I was about to turn 17. My interests weren't like most teen girls, so I won't bore you with the details of what I found more entertaining than TV, books, or the mall. But more often than not, I was occupied with personal research projects. The first time Nirali made herself invisible, I was in the middle of a research rabbit hole. I was deep into some really heady academic articles when I heard Nirali pipe up behind me. "They're wrong, you know." I groaned inwardly. We'd had the knocking talk, but she was still so bad at respecting boundaries. "Nirali, what did we say about knocking?" "Oh," she said, and sounded genuinely surprised. "I didn't think about the door." "What?" I frowned and spun my chair around to look at her. My room was empty. Wait, empty? I looked around briefly before rubbing my eyes, wondering when I'd slept last and already writing the conversation off as an auditory hallucination. Shaking my head, I started to turn back to my computer when I heard her giggle. "All right, jerkhole, where are you?" "Right here," she giggled, her voice coming from directly in front of me. "What the? How? Did you hide the speakers again?" I stood up, taking a moment to really look around the room. She'd pulled a prank like this before, hiding a complex set of speakers she'd modified to create a confluence of sound she could manipulate. It would sound like someone was anywhere in the room she specified. She'd even made it sound like she was moving around. It was really impressive, especially since she'd only been 10 at the time. This time, though, she'd either gotten much better at hiding the speakers or something else was going on. She giggled again. "No speakers, just me." "Okay, just me. But how?" I folded my arms, looking in the direction of her disembodied voice. "That's going to be hard to explain." That was Nirali for, "You won't get it." "Try me," I said, because I'm stubborn. She did, though, and I didn't. I had the beginnings of a migraine chewing on my right eye by the time she was done. Almost none of it made sense. There was something about atomic frequencies and post-dimensional drift, superliminal desynchronization, and something she dubbed the Planck supratemporal parallel. It was all way over my head. "Okay," I said, rubbing my temple as I tried to digest it all. "But how did you get here?" I walked. Infuriating. "I mean, how did you get in here?" I gestured widely to the door, which was closed, and the walls around us. "Oh." I could hear the shrug in her voice. "I just walked where the walls weren't." I squinted at the spot I thought she was standing. "You... what?" She sighed. It was a special sigh. It was the kind of sigh that told you someone much smarter than you was put out at having to dumb something down enough for you to understand. An embarrassed heat flooded my cheeks. I knew she was smarter than me, smarter than all of us, but it still made me feel like I'd failed simple math in front of Neil deGrasse Tyson and a puppy, and they were both disappointed. "I walked where the walls weren't. The walls aren't everywhere, Divya. In fact, in most places like realities, the walls aren't there at all. So I just walked in those places." I wanted to see the proofs of this statement, though I knew she wouldn't have bothered writing them down, except in scraps and incomplete snippets that only made sense to her. I also knew the proofs wouldn't make any more sense than her original explanation. Even so, it bothered me that I only understood what she meant in the vaguest, most conceptual way. It wasn't natural for me. That abstractness of thought warred with the linear way of my brain, making actual understanding impossible, and I hated it. Sana would have understood. Her brain worked that way, but not mine. I must have looked like I was struggling with it, and I was, because she continued on. "Where I am, or technically when and how, everything is a Schrodinger's puzzle of is and isn't. All I have to do is observe the places where the state of something isn't and go there." This wasn't helping. I mean, I got the basic concept of what she was saying, but in terms of the practical application of physics, it was a mess of meaningless science-y buzzwords. Nothing she said had any foundation in known science. She could have told me I ate ice cream upside down and chanted purple backwards 30 times, and the wall turned to jello, but only as long as I looked at it from a 45-degree angle. And it would have been exactly as scientifically sound as what she'd actually said. Yet she was the one who was invisible, so the limits of my understanding and science itself had no bearing on her corporeal existence. "Do you still have a body? I mean, can you see you?" "Oh yeah," she said, her voice pitched higher in excitement. "I look like 100 versions of me laid on top of each other. Looking at my hands and stuff is kind of trippy, but I'm here." Cool. I had no idea what to do with this information. She started giggling again. "What now? I can't believe you haven't noticed yet." Noticed what? I couldn't keep the flash of irritation out of my voice. It wasn't easy to accept the premise that she'd managed to trick physics into letting her pass through matter while being imperceptible to the human eye, but I'd had just about all the "how much dumber than Nirali are you" I could take for one day. "What language am I speaking?" I had to blink at that and think a moment. "It's English, isn't it?" She giggled again. "Say something," I ordered in my most authoritative big sister voice. "Nor again is there anyone who loves or pursues or desires to obtain pain of itself, because it is pain, but because occasionally circumstances occur in which toil and pain can procure him some great pleasure." If I concentrated, I could tell the words she was saying didn't quite match what I was apparently translating in my head, but I couldn't hear them for what they were. Except, "Wait, is that the lorem ipsum translation from definibus bonorum et malorum?" She giggled again. "Yep, want me to try something in Hindi?" "Yeah," I said, a little stunned and more than a little curious. "Go for it." "May he in whose lap shines forth the daughter of the mountain king, who carries the celestial stream on his head, on whose brow rests the crescent moon, whose throat holds poison and whose breast is support of a huge serpent, and who is adorned by the ashes on his body, may that chief of gods, the Lord of all, the destroyer of the universe, the omnipresent Shiva, the moon-like Shankara, ever protect me." I frowned, torn between focusing on the words and trying to identify what she was quoting. I started mouthing some of the words as my mind ran back over them, and gawped a little as recognition settled in. Did you just quote the Ramcharitmanas Ayodhya Kand invocation? Another giggle. But how? That didn't sound like Hindi at all. Fascinating, she said. It didn't feel like Hindi when I said it, but I was thinking the Hindi words. What did it sound like to you? English, I guess. I mean, it didn't sound like anything, but I understood you in English. That's so cool. Can you actually hear something other than English? Kinda. I mean, almost. If I try, I can tell the sounds you're making don't match the meaning of the words I'm not hearing, but understanding. But the meaning overrides everything else, so I can't actually identify individual sounds or phrases. Do you think you could identify the physical linguistics if we went word by word? It may be the processing of complete phrases prevents the identification of individual phonemes. Maybe, I said, shrugging, still trapped in awe of this aspect of her discovery. We could try it. She had me run her through some general object identification to give me a chance to listen for the sounds she was making and how they differed from the words I knew, the words I was hearing, but I only ever caught the ghosts of divergent beginnings and ends. She thought this was hilarious. I thought it was magical. She started making regular trips to my room in this state, usually after lights out or when our parents were at work. I didn't blame her for sneaking. Sana wasn't into the science stuff, and if our parents knew what we'd been up to, we'd have been grounded for life, especially since Nirali had already been banned from experimental projects at home. The last one had required a lot of external help and several $1,000s to clean up. But someone had to try and catalog this universal lexicon, and this was the only way we had access to it. One night, as we lay awake on the floor naming objects, we'd tried making individual sounds before, but without the intent of meaning behind them, there was no divergence. Nirali froze. I couldn't see her, of course, but something changed. She stilled to the point I worried she'd maybe phased through the floor or something and left me alone. But somehow I still felt her presence along with something sharp and alien I couldn't identify. Nirali? I whispered, cold unease settling on me like snow. Shh. It was her, but so quiet I almost missed it. I felt the urgency behind it, though, and hushed to wait in the silence with her. As the seconds ticked by, a prickling dread crawled across the room. It started at the edges where the shadows were thickest and spread outward, tainting everything it touched, including me. My pulse quickened as a primal paranoia sank in. I knew it was just Nirali and me, but it felt like a predator was stalking the shadows, searching for us, and it was only our silence that kept it from pouncing. To keep the paranoia at bay, I focused on the warm red readout of the clock above my desk. The slowly changing numbers were soothing and hypnotic. They dulled the edges of my fear until, at some point between midnight and 2 a.m., I fell asleep. I only realized this when Nirali finally whispered my name, pulling me back to reality. Divya, wake up. I swam back to consciousness slowly, shaking off the half-formed discomfort of a dream I couldn't remember. It's gone now. What's gone? I rubbed the sleep still clogging my vision and blinked at the clock above my desk. So late. Had we really been laying on the floor for 2 hours? Nirali didn't answer. Not for a long time. Long enough that I thought maybe I'd dreamed her waking me up entirely. The shadow behind the walls, she whispered, cutting the silence away like cobwebs. There was a weight to her words I couldn't describe that tickled the primal centers of my brain again. An ancient urge calling to me, telling me to hide. What? I croaked, propping myself up on my elbows. But Nirali was gone, not just quiet. There was a difference in the room when she left, and I could always sense it, even if she didn't say she was going. A few minutes later, she was at my bedroom door, actually knocking. The sound startled me, giving my heart a sudden workout with a spike of adrenaline. I snuck over to the door to let her in. Too keenly aware of the night around me and jumping at shadows I suddenly worried couldn't be trusted. Without a word, she slipped past me and crawled into bed, hiding beneath the covers with her knees against the wall and her back to me. I took my cue as it was offered and crawled in behind her, offering myself as protection against the night. Sleep was slow in coming as my body flushed the survival instinct from its veins, but eventually it must have come as the next thing I knew the sun was peeking through the windows and Nirali was watching me sleep. "Divya?" Nirali said my name like she was testing it, as if she didn't expect to hear it again. "Yeah?" "Nothing," she said, curling back under the covers before adding, "Thanks." It was a week before she came to me through the walls again. "I think it's drawn to the language," she said, pulling me out of a dream about superfluid. "What is?" I yawned, oddly comfortable with the resumption of our nightly conversations. "The shadow behind the walls." "What is that?" "I don't know. Something big. Something old. Older than time, maybe." "What's with the sauna talk? Older than time?" "I don't know, Divya, that's just what it feels like." She was always like this, caught somewhere between science and emotion, like the perfect cross between me and sauna. I think it allowed her to think abstractly enough to escape the box of the known to innovate, while remaining linear enough to build a new box to house her innovations. But sometimes it meant she didn't have the math to back it up. Sometimes it was just a feeling or the hint of a notion, but even then Nirali's feelings were always spot on, even if it took science a few decades to prove it. "All right," I said, accepting that answer. It was odd, I realized then, how a few weeks of exposure to what my mind told me was factually impossible opened me to the flexibility of the possible. I was surprised, too, when I noticed my first instinct wasn't to challenge her or demand proof, just because what she said was beyond my experience or immediate comprehension. Instead, I would nod and accept that what she said, what she experienced, was simply truth, and the limitations of my understanding couldn't change that. "What does it want?" "I don't know. I don't think it talks, but I think it listens and understands." "That's unsettling," I said, shifting under the covers. The superstitious child in me made sure my feet were hidden in the center of the bed because the shadows still couldn't be trusted. She hummed her agreement. "It's not the only thing here, though." A chill surged through me, prompting my heart into a panicked gallop. "What do you mean?" "I mean there are other things, big things, old things. Most of them can't see me, I think. I'm not really where they are, same as I'm not really where you are, but they can hear me, same as you." "Are you safe?" Nirali was silent. My stomach churned because I knew it meant something big and old and dangerous was near enough to pose a threat. After several minutes passed, she answered, "Sometimes. Only sometimes?" I sat up, staring at the spot on the floor where she would have been seated. "Only sometimes." "Then why are we still doing this, Nirali? I wouldn't have agreed if I knew you were in danger." "I know," she said quietly, "but there's so much here. If I focus on a color, I can experience everything that color has ever been and ever will be. If I think about a time, I'm sitting in what used to be here, or sometimes what will be here, watching a blur of activity that won't happen for another 1,000 years. I've seen cities you can't even begin to imagine made of glittering bone and glass. Monolithic wonders to shame the gods. Last night I was standing in the center of a black hole. Not a hologram or a simulation, but an actual black hole. Captured, contained, reproduced, harnessed, I don't know what. But it was here, and so was I, and through the black hole I saw so many other universes, all laid out like mirrors into infinity. "Nirali," I whispered, both awed and terrified. Had she been experiencing these things every night? All the hours we talked about nothing and nonsense? "But there are also bigger things," she said, her voice dipping into darkness. "Things that hide in the glint of starlight on glass. Things that follow me back from the future and wait for me in the past. They skip like stones on water, only touching the surface for a minute and never with their whole selves. But even that much is too much. It hurts to look at them. There are too many shapes at once, and all of them are hungry in ways I don't understand." Tears welled in my eyes as I listened to her. It hurt to accept these things as truth. I couldn't understand them or touch them or even experience them myself, but I had to accept they were real because my sister was invisible. She could pass through matter at will and spoke a universal language to me every night. But accepting all that also meant accepting that my sister spent every night compelled by her own curiosity to go back to this dangerous state again and again, only to be terrified by what waited in between. I'm glad they can't see me, but I don't think that will be true much longer. What? Why? The shadow behind the walls has been in my room all week. I can feel it following me around. It's listening now, but I don't think it will come in your room again. Nene, you have to stop this. I can't, she said, her voice thick with imminent tears. Of course you can. Just come back and we'll destroy whatever you've been using to shift. We can fix this. No, she said, the word wet and bent beneath an anguish no 13-year-old should have known. You don't understand. What could possibly be worth the risk? My heart broke in the silence that stretched between us. An eternity of pain and longing swirled between us, and one final fragile breath spoke of the tears she held back when she found her voice again. I can't speak English anymore. I didn't understand. Like the first time she described the math to me, this statement defied understanding. What do you mean you can't speak English anymore? I mean I can't speak anything but this stupid between language, Divya. I tried and tried all week, but all that comes out now is this ugly mess of gurgles and scrapes and noises I don't recognize, and I'm so scared. I'm so scared because they can still hear me when I'm out there with you, and out there I'm not invisible. And you and Sana and Mom and Dad aren't invisible. And none of us are safe when I'm out there. And the only time I can talk right is when I'm in here, she sobbed. When I'm here with you. My heart turned somersaults in my stomach. I let this happen. I should have stopped her the day she showed me her stupid science-shattering trick. Nene, I whispered. And all I wanted to do was hold her until everything was right. You have to come back. I don't know what we'll do to fix this, but you can't stay there. I know, she said through a heavy veil of tears. I just didn't want to lose you. To lose us. You still have me. But I won't out there, not like this. I didn't have a good answer for her. We'll find a way to fix it, was all I could say, and we both knew it wasn't enough. We also knew that it had to be, because we didn't have a choice. I felt her presence fade, and a few minutes later there was a quiet knock at my door. Nirali stood on the other side, shaking, as silent sobs racked her narrow frame. I gathered her up, shutting the door behind her, and together we curled around each other on the floor and cried. We cried until we passed out from exhaustion and woke up long after the sun had risen. I woke to Nirali watching me again and blinked away the haze of tear-stained sleep. Nirali? She nodded, mute, a sadness hanging over her shoulders. Can you? She shook her head. Nothing? She glanced up, looking over me and toward the hall as someone passed by. I could tell a million thoughts were flitting through her head in that moment, most of them conflicting. But after a minute or so, a stony resolution had settled in her eyes, and she scooted closer, waving for me to do the same. Her mouth was almost against my ear when something unimaginably foul rattled from her lips. A shudder of revulsion rocked through me at the sound of each mangled phoneme. I've never been so disgusted and terrified in my life. I could hear her voice, but it was dripping with caustic venom, dragging over hot coals, buried in the deepest ocean and clawing at the edges of sanity with angry talons. It was wrong, and to this day it was the most vile, viscerally upsetting experience of my life. The words, this language, was never meant to be spoken by man. Science won't support me, but I know in my bones these words have power man wasn't meant to use. And yet, despite my mind rebelling from the mere sound of her voice warped around these hideous words, I still knew what she'd meant, as if she'd said it in English. Don't tell Mom and Dad. My students submitted the most disturbing living history project I've ever seen. One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity, and for an easy way to bring up their GPA. I have been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller, than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class. So I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of "I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age," and "My brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard." And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked "Interview." My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with a somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed towards the screen, then back to the man. "I am here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He is going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain-smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town, though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." "Uh-huh," she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Balkans very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor, for fuck's sake." "Ahem," Mom coughed. Great-uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. "My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms. And for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did." The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard Mom whisper harshly at Great-uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. "Do you want to hear this goddamn story or not?" I heard him bark in response. "Then you better let me tell it how I want." "Mom," Olivia chimed, "please stop interrupting." "Are you presenting this in front of the class?" "No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher." "I'm sure he's heard the word shit before," Great-uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he, as a matter of fact, but other than that, the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. I'm talking too much anyway," he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. "In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it, so I'm going to read it now, and then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement." A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed in to Great Uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire. But I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadja suffered for longer. I watched in horror, knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadja to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home and she died that night, after Nadja and the baby were gone. Well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept. Thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once. Even though I didn't listen to the words being said, in fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how long passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first holed myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadja had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know. And the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I am happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious, structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me, and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time, except this morning, because this morning I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time, I have been crying. I am losing my mind without it. I have given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I am going to take my life. I am writing this because the sunlight is starting to die and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach, and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadja died. I am not long for this world. But before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep, and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadja and little Ludmilla in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen, Mom said, her voice choked. I think we have enough. Wait, Olivia chirped. He said there's more. What did you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. Hi, Miss Garrity, I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars. She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people, and even if they never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. Fine, came Mom's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish, Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen. But Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So, did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped, and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired hungrily. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly, he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained he must have gotten soaking wet, but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did Did you see the dead body? Yes, hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue and his eyes were bulging. Like this. I imagined him demonstrating. And the radio? Olivia wept. I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there, all right, and it was still on. There's a gig app that pays disturbingly well. Stay away from it at all costs. You won't find the app in any of the app stores, and even a Google search doesn't turn up results. To download it, you need to scan the QR referral code of someone who's already using the app. That feature makes it feel like you're joining an exclusive club. If a friend offers to let you scan their code, under no circumstances should you take them up on it. That friend is as good as dead to you. Trust me when I say from experience, this isn't a club you want to be a member of. Whatever you do, do not download it. I was at the bar with my buddy Matt when he convinced me to download the app. We're both broke with a ton of student loans, so aside from the occasional $2 pint night at our local dive, drinking anything other than store-bought booze was a rarity for us. But Matt had said a celebration was in order and that he was paying, which was enough to get me off of my couch for happy hour. He milked the situation, refusing to tell me exactly what we were celebrating until we were a few beers in. Sick of waiting for an explanation, I guessed it was a new job, and Matt gave a mischievous grin. It's way better than that, he said. It's an app called Tisk Task. I rolled my eyes. We'd both tried every gig app out there. When I'd get sick of switching between Uber and Lyft and washing sorority girls' puke out of the back seat of my car, I'd drive for DoorDash for a few weeks until the smell of fast food started to make me nauseous. After that, I'd hustle for gigs on Fiverr or pick up odd jobs on TaskRabbit. Then the cycle would start over again. Most days, my circumstances felt inescapable. The last thing I needed was another app to slowly chip away at my sanity as I struggled to cobble together enough cash to cover rent and utilities. I told Matt as much. Screw those other apps, Matt said. This is the easiest money I've ever made. I have to admit I was intrigued. Matt never gets excited about anything, so part of me wanted to see what had turned him into a diehard so fast. The other part of me was gullible enough to believe there might actually be such a thing as easy money that didn't involve the lottery or an inheritance. It didn't take much badgering from Matt before I scanned his code and clicked the link. The link took me to a nondescript website with nothing but a download button. Seconds later, the app was on my phone. The app itself was bare bones, like Venmo, but with even fewer frills. Nothing but a few tabs. One for my own QR referral should I want to pass it along, one for linking my bank account, and one showing my current balance of $0. In the middle of the otherwise mostly blank screen were the words, "You have no new tasks." Before I could accuse Matt of tricking me into downloading malware, he cut me off. "I know what you're thinking, but just wait for a task," he said. I was sketched out too after Rachel referred me. The fact that Rachel was using it eased my concerns. Rachel's this girl Matt hooks up with on occasion. I'd only met her a few times at Matt's, but from what I could tell, she didn't seem like the type of person to get into anything that wasn't legit. Aside from the fact that she went to film school, so she has even more debt than we do with fewer employable skills to show for it. "When you say the easiest money you've ever made," I asked, trailing off. "I've already made $800 since downloading it yesterday, and that's not counting the referral fee you just got me." "I hope they paid you well to rope me into your weird pyramid scheme," I joked. "Yeah, they did." Matt held up his own app to show me $1,000 had just been deposited into his account. Jesus, is that for real? The money transfers, if that's what you're asking. If this ends up being a scam, at least I know how much our friendship is worth to you. "Oh, they way overpaid then," he said. He laughed and flagged down the bartender for another round. We moved on to chatting about movie trailers and how there was barely anything coming out that we wanted to see. I'd almost forgotten about the app altogether when my phone buzzed 20 minutes later with my first task. I read it and reread it, mystified, and more than a little creeped out by the words on the screen. "Piss on the bathroom floor. You have 5 minutes to complete the task." Dude, you made it seem like I'd be less sketched out when I got my first task, I said. Is this a joke? What kind of sick person created this? Matt read my task and snorted. Yeah, that's a weird one, but $100 is $100. I looked at my phone again. Sure enough, the app was offering me $100 for the task. Below that, a timer was counting down, already at 4:27. There's no way I'm doing that for $100. So wait for one that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, Matt said. Or what? Piss on the floor that someone's going to have to clean? You know how many guys are going to end up doing that tonight anyway? At least you'd get paid for it. It's a dick move. People are dicks all the time. Have you gotten one like this? The first one I got was knocking over a display stand at Publix. And you did it? For $50, hell yeah, I did. It was no big deal. I apologized and went on with my day. How are you not more creeped out by this whole thing? How does it even know where we are or that you've completed the task? The same way every app does, by spying on you, using location sharing to see who you're with. I mean, how does Instagram know to show me ads for tampons every time I hang out with you? You're an asshole, Matt shrugged. Who is even paying for this? Like it doesn't make sense. All the other gig apps are connecting workers with clients and taking a cut. There's no upside to this for anyone but the people who do the tasks. My money's on Zuck, or some other billionaire. Think about it. They're bored of all the luck stuff. They've got more money than anyone could spend in a lifetime. What else are they going to use it for but to laugh at all the dumb shit people will do if you pay them? Yeah, I'm not really interested in being part of someone's messed up social experiment. I checked my phone again. The timer was down to a little over 2 minutes. I scanned the app for a decline button but didn't see one. How do I decline the task? I asked. No clue, I haven't declined one. Since there wasn't an option to decline, I decided to test the app. If someone wanted to mess with me, I'd mess with them right back. I went to the bathroom but didn't do anything. Just waited a minute, washed my hands and returned to the bar. I checked my phone just as the timer ran out. A frowny face appeared on screen. Then the app went black. Matt's phone buzzed a few seconds later. He checked it and laughed. What? Did you get a task? What is it? Matt smirked at me before holding out his phone for me to read. I barely had time to register the words, "slap your friend," before I felt Matt's hand connect with my face. The smack jolted me off balance, and I jumped up to keep from falling over. What the fuck? I could feel everyone staring at us. I couldn't tell if my cheek was burning from the slap or the embarrassment. Matt held up his hands in apology. I'm sorry, dude, but $200 was too good to pass up. Having seen the exchange, the bartender made his way over with an annoyed look. I think that's enough for you two, the bartender said. All good, Matt replied. We'll just close out. The bartender shook his head and went to the register to ring Matt up. Matt's phone buzzed again as the bartender returned with the check. Matt checked it and winced. Then he took a big swig of beer and spit it like a fountain all over the bartender. The bartender turned red as security stormed over and grabbed Matt by the back of his shirt, dragging him towards the door. Sorry, Matt said. It was just a joke. Hope it was funny 'cause you're 86th. Sign the tab and tip him good, Matt called back to me as security shoved him outside. I picked up the pen to sign the tab when my phone buzzed on the bar top. I saw the alert from Tisk Task and told myself not to check it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it. The task read, do not leave a tip. Write FUCKYOU instead. Every alarm bell in my head was going off. This went well beyond location sharing and listening in on conversations. I looked around the bar, sure I'd find someone in here watching us, pulling the strings to see how far we could be pushed. But I didn't see anyone who didn't seem to be here for a normal bar outing. And the way everyone was side-eyeing me like I was an exhibit in a freak show suggested they were not in on whatever was happening. I looked back at my phone. $250 to write fuck you instead of leaving a tip. I felt my face flush with shame as I wrote the words, but I had to know if this was for real or not. I was positive I'd walk outside to find Matt had been screwing with me, somehow faking the alerts. I turned the receipt face down and scurried out before anyone could read what I'd written. By the time I stepped outside, the app was alerting me that I was now $250 richer. In the midst of so many emotions and my desire to get away, at the time it didn't cross my mind that out of all the sketchy aspects of the app, I just encountered the biggest red flag of all. That slap from Matt wasn't a random task, it was a warning. Not following orders had consequences. Matt wanted to go somewhere else and keep celebrating our good luck, as he called it. But once the adrenaline faded, I felt hungover and on edge, so I went home. The whole thing felt wrong on multiple levels, so I decided not to go on the app for a while. Still, I needed some proof that the whole thing wasn't a hoax, so I transferred the money to my bank, and sure enough, it showed up. As easy as the money had been, I had a knot in my stomach about it, though I struggled to articulate why. Part of it was being watched, all the unanswered questions about who was behind the app and why anyone would create it. But I think something about it also felt manipulative, like I was just a puppet in some messed up game I didn't understand. But I can't deny I had felt an immediate rush, along with whatever pang of guilt came from stiffing the bartender. Like the app had tapped into some impulse I hadn't even known was there. Did I want to do that? Had the app made me take the smallest step towards some darkness lurking inside of me? I accepted some rideshare requests, hoping to distract myself. But even those reminded me how I was trapped driving, having leased a car to be able to drive for the apps, and now needing to accept a certain number of rides to make my payments each month. It wasn't even midnight before I found myself shampooing the floor mats in the back seat after some drunk kid puked on the ride home from a bar. Screw this, I thought. I opened Tisk Task and waited. No tasks showed up. I refreshed the app, but still nothing. I figured they just didn't have the bandwidth to monitor the app 24/7, but looking back again, I think it was conditioning me to want more tasks. Like the app was negging me, making me feel unworthy so I'd be grateful when it paid attention to me again. It wasn't until the next day that a new task showed up. I won't bore you with all the details of the tasks I accepted over the next few days to chip away at my debt, except to say that they seemed mostly mundane, if pretty dickish. At first they were basic, things like spitting gum where someone's guaranteed to step in it, bumping into a kid with ice cream so they drop it, ringing someone's doorbell in the middle of the night and ditching. I realize now that they were escalating, though I barely noticed at the time. 72 hours after refusing to piss on a bathroom floor, I was doing things like taking a package off a neighbor's porch and tossing it in the dumpster and calling a random number to leave a message telling someone their sister had died. Robert Cialdini wrote this book, Influence, that I read a while back. In it, he talks about the psychological tactic enemy soldiers use to turn patriotic American POWs against their own country. See, no true patriot will immediately talk crap about their homeland, but if you can get them to admit that the U.S. isn't perfect, it's a slippery slope. Something in the mind makes you double down on things you said in the past. So once they'd admitted the U.S. wasn't perfect, they were willing to talk about the flaws in more detail. With a bit of patience, the enemy soldiers would have American POWs publicly denouncing American values altogether. They never even noticed the concessions they were making until it was too late to turn back. Like those soldiers, I didn't fully recognize that I was leaping across lines I never would have crossed before Matt introduced me to the app. The first time I truly had a chance to recognize how far I'd strayed arrived about a week after I accepted the first task. I hadn't gone back to my other gig apps since the vomit incident. I made way too much accepting tasks for what felt like far less effort. But for whatever reason, I still don't like to think of myself as a gig worker. Yes, I take gigs, but knowing I might need something on my resume, I occasionally work part-time for a company doing data entry. It's already mind-numbing work for a little above minimum wage, but returning to it this time was downright painful. Up to this point, I had had to leave the app open in the background for it to assign me tasks, but halfway through the morning my phone lit up with a notification even though I was pretty sure I had closed the app and my phone was on focus mode. The funny thing is, I had been wishing for something to break the monotony of the work, and here it was, my desire fulfilled. Email, redacted folder name, to redacted email address. You have 90 seconds to complete the task. My pulse quickened as I read the notification. On the one hand, I knew it was wrong and probably illegal. On the other hand, As far as I had been told, the company did not deal in sensitive information that would interest the public. The bulk of the data I even had access to was mundane user analytics the company sold to advertisers. I quickly rationalized the task, though I suspected it would likely be the end of my working there. I'd already decided to do it before I even registered that it paid a whopping $2,000, by far the most I'd been offered for any task up to that point. It took all of 30 seconds before the money was on its way to my bank account. I got a huge hit of adrenaline, something I'd started to crave lately. My head buzzing, I focused as much as I could until lunch. Upon my return, I wasn't remotely fazed to learn my supervisor wanted to see me in her office. She was shockingly nice about the entire thing. She did not immediately fire me, though she was well within her right to. Instead, she gave me a chance to explain myself. A look of confusion came over her when I declined, and she politely let me go. Like I said, I had been told, by her specifically, that we did not deal in particularly sensitive information, so the way she handled the whole thing tracked. But when I looked back one final time, I saw something on her face that made me think otherwise. Dread. She looked terrified. The next day I understood why when I saw on the news that the company was shuttering its doors after a data breach. The pang of guilt I felt over potentially costing a lot of people their jobs was quickly replaced by a fear of the possible repercussions. I wondered if I would be thrown under the bus in the company's attempts to cover their tail. As if it could read my mind, my phone lit up with a notification informing me I'd received a $5,000 employee loyalty bonus. The familiar mix of elation at the huge payday and not-inducing chills from being involved in something so strange crept in, and I managed to shake off any remorse I felt. I fell into the now routine act of rationalizing away what I had done. Whereas before I'd told myself no one was really getting hurt by my actions, this time I focused on the fact that clearly the company had been doing something shady, or else a seemingly innocuous folder wouldn't have been enough to bring them down. Fuck them for doing something that put me in this position in the first place, I thought. It wasn't the first time I had gotten angry that week. Getting angry anytime guilt or shame started to creep in over a task had become a pattern for me. Like a lot of you reading this, I did what I was supposed to do. I went to college. I studied something useful. But the jobs in what I studied were mostly in bigger cities, far away from family circumstances that required me to be close to home. And even if I could have moved, the entry-level pay wouldn't have covered the cost of living before I took my loans into account. It didn't matter what I did or where I went. Life was shaping up to be one big hamster wheel. Everywhere around me, I heard folks complaining about how hard it was to find good workers who care about the job, who are loyal. Well, what did they think was going to happen when they filled our heads with dreams of cushy office jobs and home ownership, loaded us up on debt, and then offered us one fucking way to pay it off? By staring at a register or a screen doing absolute bullshit for $15 an hour, if we're lucky, for 10 to 12 hours a day. We were sold a bill of goods. The American dream is dead and gone, but the older generations are still doling out advice based on their experience of a steady paycheck and a reasonable mortgage. And on the flip side, every time we open a fucking app, some rich influencer is saying that if we follow our passion, we'll find more freedom and success than we ever thought possible. But both sides are speaking from a place of having already found success. And every single one of them is positive the only thing that factors into that success is good old hard work. So of course most of us end up juggling multiple gigs, trapped in the hustle economy. At least that way we have some semblance of control over our lives. Sure, we have crippling student loans that our best hope of paying off is the government stepping in to forgive. And yeah, buying even an outhouse is a pipe dream. But at least we get to clock in and clock out as we want, quit when we get bored, give rides or deliver food, YOLO what little we have into crypto, or curate our own social feeds on the off chance fortune might rain down on us and lift us out of the endless grind. I'm not proud of how little I hesitated accepting these tasks. It legitimately felt like, for the first time, I had a way out of the rat race, so what if I had to be a dick to do it? Jeff Bezos wouldn't even let his employees take a proper bathroom break, and look where he ended up. Not long after I thought I had perfected the art of justifying my actions, I got the task that finally changed my mind. The day before I downloaded the app, I had made plans for the following weekend with a woman I'd matched with on Hinge. I'd been anxious about the date when I committed to it, worried we'd be limited to the cheapest margaritas I could afford along with complimentary chips and salsa. Telling my dates I'd had a late lunch and wasn't hungry enough for dinner had become my go-to move on the dating scene. But that night was different, because I could finally afford to go somewhere nice. I texted her back to let her know we were still on and told her where to meet me. We met up at a spot local foodies love and hit it off immediately. When I say it was the best date I've ever been on, I'm not exaggerating. We bonded over the things we had in common, laughed our asses off ribbing each other about the things we disagreed on, and kept the tapas and fancy cocktails flowing for 2 hours before things went south. When my date announced she needed to use the restroom, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. As she was walking away, I checked the task I'd just been assigned. Tell the woman in red to hurry up and get it over with. I looked around the restaurant and saw a woman in a red coat sitting alone a few tables over. She was lost in thought, running a finger around the rim of her martini glass. I checked my phone again and frowned in confusion. Get what over with? I didn't consider the question for long enough. I had gotten greedy. I happily ignored all the details about the woman that might have stopped me from going over there. It didn't seem like it could possibly be that big a deal, but the payout alone should have been enough of a red flag. If I'd received $7,000 in total to destroy a company, how innocent could a task worth $10,000 have been? I got up and walked over. I was already speaking before the woman even realized I was there. "Hurry up and get it over with," I said. I registered shock on her face as my words sunk in, but she didn't say a word. I didn't say anything else, just returned to my seat. "What was that about?" my date asked, having seen the exchange as she came back from the bathroom. "Oh, nothing," I said, staring at my phone expectantly. "Don't worry about it." I grinned as my phone alerted me that I was $10,000 richer. "What should we order next?" But my date wasn't looking at me. She was staring in horror as the woman in red left the restaurant in tears. We didn't have a view of the street outside, but we could clearly hear the screech of tires and the screams of patrons close enough to the window to see the woman in red walk into oncoming traffic. My date didn't look at me again until she was giving the police her statement. By the time the cops had quit asking me questions about what I said to the woman in red and decided I wasn't involved in her death, my date was long gone. That was the last straw. This time I couldn't rationalize away the guilt and shame. This app was evil. There was no more pretending that wasn't the case. Whether there were flesh and blood employees behind it or some sinister presence, I didn't know. But the evil nature of it was undeniable. I went home and deleted the app. I sent Matt a string of texts asking him what he'd gotten me into. I called him several times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I wished my roommates weren't out of town, as I was desperate to talk to someone, anyone, about what had happened. Instead, I could only smoke and drink myself into an oblivion as I waited for a reply from Matt, finally falling asleep around 4 a.m. I woke at 9 a.m. to frantic banging on the door. It was Matt, eyes bloodshot with dark crescent moons carved into his lower lids. Before I could lay into him, he had pushed his way inside and started closing the blinds. "I fucked up, man," he said. "I fucking fucked up. I shouldn't have gotten you involved." "No shit, dude. I had to delete the app." "You can't delete it." "What?" "It keeps coming back. You have to get rid of your phone. And even then, I'm not sure." I checked my phone and sure enough, it was front and center. I deleted it again and watched it disappear. But when I scrolled to my next screen, it had already reappeared. "What the fuck is this thing, Matt?" He didn't answer, his face catatonic now. That's when I finally noticed he had blood on his shirt. "What happened? Where's that blood from?" He sat on the floor and hugged his knees as he started rocking in place. "I fucked up. I fucking fucked up. They're dead. They're dead. They're dead." He just kept repeating the words over and over like a broken record, making my skin crawl. "Who's dead?" "All of them." Because I wouldn't do it. "Wouldn't do what?" "I couldn't do it. I tried, but I couldn't." Whatever it is, we'll go to the police and get it straightened out. We'll tell them about the app, I said. We can't go to them. They'll blame me. For what? Just tell me what happened. You don't get it, he snapped. We can't. They're listening. They know what we're doing. Okay, I said, trying to calm him down. All right, why don't you take a shower and get cleaned up? Then you can tell me what happened and we'll figure out what to do. Shortly after I got him in the shower, someone knocked on the door. By the time I looked out the window, a delivery truck was driving away. I cracked the door and saw a small box on the front step. I picked it up and shook it. Whatever was inside thudded around. I locked the door behind me and carried the box to the kitchen. Is someone here? Matt called from the shower. Just Amazon, all good. I cut open the box and stared in confusion. Inside was a revolver. My phone buzzed. An alert from TiskTask. My hand shook as I checked it. Matt's services are no longer needed. Terminate his employment. You have 5 minutes to complete the task. A wave of nausea hit me. I thought about calling 911, but I realized Matt might be right. I had no idea what to tell them. There's an evil app that wants me to murder my friend? Good luck with that. I decided to call Rachel. She was the only other person I knew of who was involved with this thing. Maybe she'd have some information or know what to do. I started to ask Matt if he could recall her number when I remembered he'd texted us both when we all went to a party together a few months back. I searched through my texts and found the chat. Rachel picked up almost immediately. Hello? Rachel? It's Matt's friend, Spencer. I kept my voice down and went to my room. Something happened. I don't even know where to start. Where's Matt? He's here, in the shower. I think they want me to... Not over the phone. I'm close by. I'll be right over. I hung up and noticed the shower had stopped. I walked back out to the living room to find Matt, still wet but now dressed in the clothes I'd left for him. His back was turned, but I could see the empty box next to him on the floor. What's the task? He asked. Matt, I wasn't going to... He turned and aimed the gun at me. I'm serious. I wasn't. I would never... Just put down the gun and let's talk. Shut the fuck up and let me think. With his free hand, he clutched his head, his face scrunching up as he held back a sob. He took a deep breath and let it out. I'm sorry, man. He gripped the gun tighter. His finger moved to the trigger. A car door slammed outside and got his attention. He hesitated as he turned to look. I jumped in his direction and tackled him. The gun skidded across the floor. He thrashed at me as I held him down. Stop, I said. I'm not trying to hurt you. The fight went out of him and he quit struggling. I'm going to stand up now, I told him. Are you going to be calm? He nodded. I stood and moved to the window, peering through the blinds to see Rachel walking up the front steps. It's just Rachel, I told him. The three of us are going to figure this out together, okay? Matt didn't say anything, but he sat up. I unlocked the door and had it halfway open when a sickening realization hit me. Rachel had never been to my place before, and I didn't give her my address. I was already slamming the door when she raised her own gun and fired. Relief washed over me as I realized she'd missed. I dropped to the floor, reached up and deadbolted the door. I turned around and pressed my back against the wall, but from this angle I could see that she hadn't missed after all. Matt's lifeless eyes stared at me from the carpet, blood pooling around the hole in his head. Steady, methodical thumping came from the door, the sound of Rachel kicking at it. I scrambled to grab the revolver from where it had skidded across the floor when I tackled Matt. I aimed it at the door and yelled out, "Please don't make me shoot you, Rachel. Just leave." "I can't," she called back, her voice cracking. "They have my sister. I gave them... I told her." She couldn't finish the sentence. Bullets peppered the door around the lock. She kicked it again, the frame splintering. I pulled the trigger, hoping a warning shot would scare her off. Click. Nothing. I pulled the trigger again. Click. Nothing. They'd sent me an unloaded gun. A twisted test that I'd apparently failed. I ran to the garage and climbed in my car. I had no idea where Rachel was, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I pushed the garage door button. The door hummed as it rose slowly. Rachel's boots appeared just outside. I didn't hesitate. I turned the ignition and shifted into drive. I slammed on the gas, bursting through the door and catching Rachel off guard. Her upper body slammed into the hood of the car even as she fired the gun at me through the windshield. Unable to see with bits of garage door blocking my view, I swerved across the lawn and plowed into the mailbox, sandwiching Rachel's body against it. Tears burned my eyes as I climbed out of the car and crawled towards Rachel's body. Neighbors had emerged from their homes. If they'd been disturbed by the gunshots, they'd hidden behind closed doors. Now that the threat seemed neutralized, they exited to witness the gruesome aftermath. I leaned over Rachel's dying body. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I didn't want to." Her mouth flapped uselessly as she tried to speak. I moved closer to hear what she was saying. "My sister. They said they'd let her quit if I... Please help her." "Who are they?" I asked. But Rachel was gone. I noticed blood dripping onto the lawn near Rachel's arm. I looked down to see I'd caught a bullet in the shoulder. I heard sirens as I passed out next to her body. I awoke in the hospital to find an officer sitting with me. I tried to sit up. "Stay down," she said. "You were hurt pretty bad, but you're going to be okay. Your parents have been notified and they're on the way." It wasn't... I had no idea where to begin. "You don't have to say anything. You're not in any trouble. The neighbors' reports made it pretty clear it was self-defense. The two deceased turned out to be some pretty big drug dealers and you got caught in the crossfire. But you're lucky. Things could have been a lot worse for you." "That's not what happened," I said. She looked at me for a while, taking me in. Then she said, "You're not thinking straight. Get some rest and we can chat later if you still want to." The cop stood up and walked out of the room. I noticed a phone on the table between my bed and the chair she'd been sitting in. "Hey, you left your phone," I called out. She turned back and shook her head as she held up a cell. "Mine's right here. I'm pretty sure that's yours." The phone buzzed on the table, giving me instant chills. A single notification lit up the screen. "You have a new task." My wife has been peeking at me from around corners and behind furniture. It's gone from weird to terrifying. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea. And that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door, when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes, and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird, and just totally out of character for her, like I said, but I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of Oj in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning. Grinning like the Cheshire Cat, I screamed, I'll admit it. Not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her, or even yell after her. I just stood there frozen in shock, wondering what fuck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again. From over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that?" I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was fucking terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house, and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. "What the fuck, Lynn?" I snapped. "This shit is getting really fucking annoying." I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk, but instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. "I swear to God, just fucking stop it," I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a fucking lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion, and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house, about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill, so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that, when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now!" She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could hear them from her place outside. Her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home." And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled, like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know, she's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. Number, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. Number, she looked awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly, she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believed she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting. But this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong, dangerous even, like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Mary Ann, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. Yes, she answered, already sounding irritated. Mary Ann, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk? I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin? She said coolly. It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something. I was quickly interrupted. It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is that you want from me? She asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues, I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking, or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind, she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well, I said, my frustration evident in my voice. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me, she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn. I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together but failing. Marianne, I started. Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else. Someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet, but I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube? Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was going on a fucking stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floors around here, shit?" Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why the fuck are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something?" Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. "Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction. But fuck me. Your wife's in here collecting eyeballs," Chris said, gagging. "Ben, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I'm getting nauseous." "All right." I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue and I couldn't help but gag. "Who the fuck lines up eyeballs in their closet like that?" Chris mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a fucking exorcist," he said. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any—" His words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Christ," I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving, to say the least. Wide eyes, and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements as if she were nodding. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn," I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast, scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run! Go!" I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move, because a second later I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. You, playing hide and seek?" I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. And then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word, I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us. But I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search, but of course Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now, I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words, "I found you," and a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. The previous tenant of my new flat left a survival guide. I'm not sure I want to live here anymore. I moved in with my boyfriend yesterday. We've been together for 5 years now, and we're old and wise enough to settle down and finally leave our parents' houses. He just turned 24, and I'm 22. He's the love of my life. His name is Jamie, and I couldn't be happier to be living with him. When we decided to make the leap, we spent 2 months looking at flats and houses we couldn't afford to buy yet, so renting was our only option, but the prices were astronomical. For our budget, we would have been lucky to get a box room and a stove. Jamie works for a local 24-hour fast food restaurant, and I'm training to be a teacher. The early stages of training don't pay much, and I owe a lot in student loans, so finances are tough. We had almost given up hope until we found our flat. It was nothing special, but to us it was a palace. A spacious 2-bedroom apartment with views of a city park, a balcony, and local conveniences. It was in a tower block in a not-so-nice area, but neither of us had been wealthy growing up. We weren't fussy, just grateful to be together. The advert was sweetened by the deposit-free option and open-ended tenancy. The landlord was happy to sign a 5-year contract if we wanted. That sort of thing never happens in the city. We were told that along with no deposit, we would also have no inspections, but would be liable to pay for any damage when we ended the tenancy. I'd never heard of anything quite like it. We knew that for our budget and location, we weren't going to get any better. We snapped the place up fast, not even bothering to view it. It felt like our only chance. Move-in day rolled around quickly, and yesterday we got the keys to our first home together. It was such a strange feeling. The day was chaos, getting our stuff in and up in the lift. We were flat number 42 on the 7th floor. The items we couldn't get in the lift had to be taken up all the stairs by the removal men. I think they were grateful we weren't any higher, but I still wish we had been able to give them a better tip. In the evening, we settled down on our second-hand sofa, given to us by a cousin of a friend, and watched some TV. We smoked cigarettes on the balcony looking at the park and fell asleep on our mattress on the floor super early because we had no energy to put the bed together yet, and Jamie had work at a hideous time of the morning. We slept soundly last night. I felt safe and happy. I don't think that feeling is coming back anytime soon, and it's all due to the note I found this morning. I found it in the kitchen, having a coffee, hours after Jamie had left for his early shift at work. It was in one of the cupboards that were fixed to the wall. There were a bunch of useful items from the previous tenant. Spare keys to the flat, a set of tiny keys that locked and unlocked the windows, necessary for those with kids this high up, spare smoke alarm batteries, and a folded-up piece of paper. The note was handwritten with "New occupier of flat 42" in beautiful cursive on the blank side. I opened it up and sat down to read. I can't really describe it to you, so I'm going to copy it out below. Dear new occupier, firstly, welcome to your new home. I lived here before you for 35 years with my husband. Unfortunately, he had an incident at home recently that I'd rather not discuss that claimed his life. My sister has now decided I can't keep up with the demands of the property and has insisted that I move in with her and her husband. I was reluctant at first, but the stairs do kill me at my age, and without Bernie, it's filled with sadness. Anyway, when you've lived somewhere for as long as I have, it feels like a person that you know. You understand its personality and what makes it tick. I thought it was probably pertinent that I impart some of that knowledge on you. It's a wonderful home, honestly. I have lived through best and worst years, and leaving it behind is very emotional. But if you are to survive and get the best out of it, then there are some steps you need to follow. 1. The landlord will never bother you. He doesn't visit, call, or communicate in any way. But make sure to pay your rent in a timely fashion always. I have only dealt with him once in 35 years, and let's just say I never missed another rent day. Any repairs required, you speak to the agent you rented the place with. 2. Do not use the communal lift between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m. Just don't do it. This step is vital if you are to have a happy life here. It really is life or death. Don't do it. This has cost me and many others in the building greatly, and I would rather not elaborate on why you shouldn't do this. Just please don't do it. I cannot stress this enough. 3. When you hear the strange animal noises coming from flat 48, don't question it. Mr. Prentice lives there and he's a lovely chap. Don't be afraid to say hello to him in the corridor or on the stairs. He's old school, so he never risks the lift. But whatever you do, don't check on him when you hear the noises. You'll know when you hear them. 4. If you ever come across a window cleaner on the balcony, ignore him. He may seem like the nicest fellow you've ever had trying to sell you something at the door, but it really is best that you don't engage. He will go away if you ignore him. But he tries pretty hard the first few times, so you'll need some resilience. Whatever you do, don't offer him anything. No money, no hot drink. 5. Don't leave food scraps out. Bin or refrigerate them immediately. If you have small animals, it is imperative that you watch them eat and take away any leftover food immediately after they are done. This and Rule 2 go hand in hand. The things forage all day and seem to really love animal feed. You don't want them in your flat, I promise. You can leave what you want out between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m., so you may want to feed your pets then. 6. Don't communicate with any neighbors who claim to come from flats 65 to 72. These flats suffered a fire in the late 80s that devastated the whole floor. All the residents died in their homes. The building was mostly council-owned at the time, and they never bothered to renovate the flats. They've been empty ever since, but every now and again someone will knock at your door claiming to live in one of these flats and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed 2 extra security bolts to avoid these fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. 7. Simple one for you here. Keep a weapon in each room. Sometimes you follow all these steps and something still slips through the net. Better to be safe than sorry. 8. The building has a committee that will try and get you to join. It's one of those neighbors groups about improving living conditions for all residents. It's a nice group, and the lady who runs it, Terry from Flat 26, is a fantastic neighbor. By all means, get involved. But I wouldn't recommend babysitting Terry's 2 children. She'll ask you because the poor woman needs a break. But if you accept, don't say, I didn't warn you. 9. Stray hairless cats sometimes roam in the hallway. I know they're supposedly a special expensive breed, but they don't belong to anyone. They're mostly harmless, but don't pick them up. Not unless you see one of those neighbors that claims to live in 65 to 72. Then grab the cat and lock it inside with you. It'll burn your skin a little, but the cats are friendly and I wouldn't want to see them hurt. 10. There is no way to fix the damp patch on the ceiling in the bedroom. Sometimes it will turn a deep crimson and look quite concerning, but please try not to be alarmed. It doesn't drip, it doesn't get any bigger, and it's been there longer than I have. The landlord won't budge on it, according to the agents. I flagged it many times, even called the police the first night it changed color, but it was a waste of time, and it will be for you too. It's best to ignore it. 11. You can trust the postman. His name is Ian Flanders, and he's been the postman since before I moved in. He has his own key to the main door and delivers post to the door every morning at 8:54. I can't include everything here, or it would become a novel, but if you have any questions, Ian will help you. 12. Finally, the first few weeks are the worst. You'll feel like you've made a mistake. I'm sure reading this you already do. But if you can get through the first few weeks, it really is a lovely block to live in. Every property has its quirks, and this one is a little extra special. But you can be truly happy here if you just take my advice. I wish you all the best, I really do. Yours truly, Mrs. Prudence Hemmings. I don't really know what to think after reading the note. Hopefully it was some sort of joke, but the agent had said the previous tenant was an elderly lady, and I can't see anyone named Prudence Hemmings attempting to play practical jokes on someone they'd never met. There were also parts of the note I couldn't disprove. There was indeed a large damp patch above the bed that me and Jamie had already discussed reporting. No crimson, but it definitely existed. I had also commented on a beautiful Sphinx cat roaming the halls as we were moving in. I started to get seriously freaked out. Our dream, our beautiful little home, had just become a source of fear and confusion. I checked the time and it was 9:14. Damn it. Out of time to catch Postman Ian. When I opened the door to check, sure enough, 2 letters addressed to a Mrs. Hemmings sat on the doorstep. At about 11:15, my worst fears were truly confirmed when a friendly, middle-aged looking man carrying window cleaning equipment knocked on my balcony door. I ignored him. I didn't want to take the risk until I'd spoken to Jamie and showed him the note. I'd texted him already to rush home. I felt bad as the man rapped his knuckles against the door for over 10 minutes. But honestly, the longer it went on, the more I was terrified. My windows were sparkling, and due to our lack of curtains, I couldn't even hide from his gaze. I felt so exposed. He stayed for a total of 30 minutes exactly, and never once did he stop looking at me or knocking. He shouted the occasional ultra-friendly line or humble request for a beverage in the heat through the door, but I did my best to avoid eye contact. When he finally left, I looked outside every window in the flat, but I couldn't see him on any of the other balconies or see any equipment suggesting he was around. He had vanished completely. Jamie still hadn't texted me back. He must have been having a rough shift. It was a Friday and they were always busy. It wasn't often that he didn't reply. He was due home in around an hour anyway. I read the note probably hundreds of times over. I tortured myself reading it for the next hour, desperately waiting for Jamie to come through the door to tell me it was all crazy and I should relax. I hoped for that so much, but Jamie never came. His shift should have finished around midday, but by 2 p.m. he still wasn't home. I panicked. I cried. I left over 100 voice messages on his phone but got nowhere. I finally decided it had been long enough that calling his work wouldn't embarrass him, and his boss told me that he had never turned up for his shift. I thought about it. What could have happened? And then it hit me. Jamie's shift started at 4 a.m. today. He would have left the flat at 3:15 and taken the lift down the stairs. I don't know what to do. I've tried to convince myself it was all just a big joke. Maybe Jamie wrote the note and got his boss in on it. A voice in my head kept telling me that he couldn't write like that if he tried, but I had to attempt to fool myself. It's getting late and he still isn't home. What if it's all true? I think we made a big mistake. There's a death row inmate who we've executed over a dozen times. He won't stay dead. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. "Up and at 'em, cowpoke," he called in that mocking tone. "Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a—" Billy. Warden Taft silenced him with a word. "If you can't act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out." Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. "Nah," he muttered. "This is a show I can't miss." Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked him to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done, or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry. The warden, his closest men, the thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections, the prison physician, the families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning, we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. "Good morning, sirs," he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it. I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You're not... You're supposed to be..." "I don't know what you mean, sir." He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. "You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me?" Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? "Jesus Christ," Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. It's Billy. I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh. At 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time. There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. And well, it didn't work. I blinked. It didn't... What? There came a long sigh. Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself. And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18, 1999. Unofficially, they'd tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the COs who'd once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear, but how could I not now sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandoned me. I winced. Number no, Glass. I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay, Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. It? The thing standing behind you. I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let's take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh? You here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not. It's freedom. The only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way, if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. I... we're... we're trying our best, Glass. But you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time, leaning in so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear my heart stopped beating, and my blood froze in place in my veins, and it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't think. I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air, and my vision blurred, and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later they showed me the tapes from the security camera. There'd been nothing behind me. Nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder, nothing at all. On May 7th, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, via hanging, or so I heard, in some government black site somewhere, far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate. Really, because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. "Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez?" I shook my head, and he sighed. Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of Fifth Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them, and childhood memories, and all that. Everybody deserves justice, no matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force, got the case reopened, found the guy, and I watched him fry. And I like to imagine she was there watching too as he burned. There was a tense moment, and then a chuckle. Of course, after that bullet to the hip in '71, I couldn't walk the beat anymore. But I've been just as happy here, watching justice be served. It makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order to the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. "I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally going to retire, Mendez," he confessed. "After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice?" I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? "He'll die, sir," I promised. "It'll work this time, it has to." But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression, as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes, haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed, and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized, and with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue. And even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while, I screamed myself hoarse. "Help! Somebody, please! Jesus Christ, we need help in here!" But nobody came. And all of a sudden, some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle. Eyes wide, round, and bloated tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my co-workers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black, or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass." No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay?" Silence. I take a deep breath. "How old are you, Glass?" I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. "I am old, child." His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and all were equally ancient. "Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it." I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. "Why did you do what you did to those girls?" "Just so I could feel something again," he whispered. "Anything." "Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt? Remorse?" "You ask that of me? Me who has watched empires rise and fall." He almost sounded amused. "Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by, essentially, identical stock, and in greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I myself covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing." And suddenly, he stood from his chair, as if he'd never been restrained at all. "A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez." I stared up at him in disbelief. How did you—" But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. "You owe me a death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt." I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. "I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard." "Do it! Pay me what you owe." It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead, I could just feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago, and every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood, and it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements. And then the both us just sit there, staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking, for an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky, that my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been unpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all. But they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's for research. I'm sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as Glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3rd, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song, when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavilon and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere. And yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently, he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not going to let me walk away from this. Not while I still owe him a debt. But I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from that blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know. Practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients. And I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I'm slipping into madness, or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror, to finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing. I have to pay what I owe, even if it kills me. Things have deteriorated here to a degree that I didn't foresee. I didn't know how much writing about the things that are happening out here would affect every single part of my life. And maybe that was stupid of me. Maybe I should have considered it more seriously. But honestly, I just thought I was writing about things that a few people would want to hear. I didn't think it would get this much attention. People ask me about the stairs now. It doesn't happen every day, but when it does happen, I never really know what to say. My bosses know someone is talking about them, and I'm sure that if they know, the higher-ups know. And I can tell you that they aren't happy about it. I've been formally told that I am not to speak a word about them to anyone anymore, which is part of the reason this has to be my final update. I can't risk my job for this. As much as it's been wonderful to get a lot of these things off my mind, I still do love my work, and I need to be out here. If anything, my being aware of what's really going on is enough reason to stick it out. I may not be able to tell people that they're out there, but if I see them, I can direct traffic away to somewhere safer. Because of the amount of attention the stories have gotten, I've heard a lot of stories being swapped back and forth. I've heard so many I can't even remember most of them. The ones I do remember are the ones that I wish I could forget. One story that's made the rounds here was about a young woman who disappeared upstate. Initially, everyone assumed she was a runaway. She didn't come from a great home life, and so it really wasn't any kind of surprise that she'd choose to cut and run. But people started coming forward saying that they'd seen her around the park shortly before she vanished, so some of the rangers in the area were sent out to make sure she hadn't hung herself or something on any of the back trails. It took them a while, but they did find her. Well, not all of her. Just half of her tongue and a quarter of the lower jaw. Very clean cuts from what I heard. They've never found the rest of her. So many stories about children, so many of them going missing and turning up in caves, wedged in between impossibly tight spaces. So many of them found on mountain peaks or at the bottoms of sheer gullies. Missing shoes, missing socks, or found with both in perfect condition despite them being miles and miles away from where they vanished. So many stories of black-eyed people wandering around the woods and calling out in the night, mimicking the sound of running water or a bobcat screaming. One man in particular goes to every news station he thinks will listen to him and tells the same story. He was deer hunting, had camped out in a very remote area, and woke up because something was scraping against his tent. He thought it was a raccoon or a fox until the thing pressed its face against the door of the tent, at which point he could very clearly make out a human nose and mouth. He kicked at it, but it leapt back and was gone by the time he opened the tent flap, gun at his side. He fired 2 warning shots, and when the sound had faded, he heard a snap behind him. A man was standing at the edge of the campsite. This man was not wearing any clothing, but he also didn't possess any kind of human flesh. As this hunter described it, the man was made of some kind of amalgamation of raw meat and hair, as if someone had scooped up roadkill and molded it into the vague shape of a man. The face was lumpy and only a rough approximation of a human face. The thing opened its lopsided mouth, and from it came the sound of the gun the hunter had fired. It did this twice before mimicking the sound of the tent zipper and fleeing into the night. A young couple, out for a hike in the rocky areas of my park, reported to me yesterday that they had seen something strange out on a peak I'm very familiar with. They were taking turns looking through a pair of binoculars when the man noticed a hiker climbing up a very steep part of the cliff face. He watched the man scale the slope, and it didn't occur to him until the incident was over that this person had no climbing gear. When the climber reached the top of the peak, which was about 5 miles away, they turned and faced the young man. He said whoever, or whatever this person was looking right at them. The climber waved in an exaggerated manner before snapping in half at the waist, sideways, and leaping off the peak. The young man didn't see where the climber landed. I sent them on their way with assurances that I'd check it out. I lied. I won't be turning in a report because there are 10 others exactly like it. The climber is well known in that area. I don't question it anymore. There are so many things I won't ever be able to understand about my job, and it would take me years to relate all of the things I've heard in the last few months. When I feel like my job isn't in jeopardy, I will come back. It may be in a different format, but I will come back. Thank you all for sticking by my side and enjoying the things I've talked about. If you go out into the woods, I encourage you to be safe. Bring water, food, survival equipment. Let people know where you're going and when you'll be back. Don't go on uncharted paths unless you know exactly what you're doing. And above all, don't touch them. Don't look at them. Don't go up them. Something happened 63 years ago that's haunted me my entire life. I've never told anyone about it until now. It's official. I'm an old man. For the last couple years, I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s, but math is simple and unforgiving. Today is my 75th birthday, and God, the years do fly. I'm not here for your well wishes. This is hardly a milestone I'm excited about. I'm glad to still be here, of course, but I find I have less and less to live for with every passing year. My bones ache, my kids live far away, and the other side of my bed has been empty for just over 8 months now. In fact, once I cast my vote against that goddamn Trump this November, I may have nothing to live for at all. So spare me your happy birthdays and your congratulations, if you please. I'm here because I have a story for you, and it's one I've never told before. I used to think I kept it inside because it was silly, or maybe because nobody would believe it. I found, though, that the older you grow, the more exhausting it becomes to lie to yourself. If I'm being perfectly honest, I've never told anybody this story because it scares me, almost to death. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen close. The year was 1950, the setting a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around and my mom was a chore whore. Boy, was I proud of myself when I came up with that one, so I wasn't apt to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was the place to be that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly children's books, was meager to say the least. But within the walls of that miserly structure, I would find no undone chores, no nagging mother, God rest her soul, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I would be expected to associate. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend his precious days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. The first half of my summer was even more dreadful than I had imagined it would be. I would sleep in until 10, do my chores, and then ride my bike to the library, and by bike, I mean rusty log of shit attached to a pair of wheels. Once there, I would split my time between unintentionally annoying the elderly patrons and deliberately doing so. One pleasant lady actually interrupted my incessant tongue-clicking to hiss a "shut the fuck up" at me, the first time I ever heard a grown-up use the F word. Big fucking deal, I know, but in those days it was unheard of. The dreary days turned to woeful weeks. I had actually begun praying for school to start again, until I discovered the basement. I could have sworn I'd roamed every inch of that library, but one day, in the far corner behind the foreign language collection, I stumbled across a small wooden door I had never seen before. That was where it all began. The door was windowless and made from oak that looked far older than the wall in which it rested. It had a knob of black metal that quite literally looked ancient. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn it was crafted in the 17th century. Engraved on the knob was what appeared to be a single footprint. I had the sense that whatever lay beyond this door was forbidden to me, and therefore probably the most interesting thing I would encounter all summer. I quickly glanced around to make sure nobody was watching me, then turned the heavy knob, slipped behind the door, and shut it. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple of steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to. What I actually found was far more subtle, a small string dangling from above, but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. Back in the day, lots of light bulbs were operated with strings, and this was one of them. My surroundings were instantly illuminated. I was standing on a small, dusty platform that looked as though it hadn't seen life in quite some time. To my left was a crickety-ass spiral staircase, made of wood and appearing ready to collapse at any second. The bulb was the only source of light in the room, and it was feeble, so when I peered over the railing to see what lay below, the bottom of the staircase dissolved into the darkness. I was beginning to feel scared. This place, wherever I was, seemed to have no business in a town library. It was as though I were in a completely different building. But no 9-year-old likes to let a mystery go unsolved. Looking back, I wish I could tell my prepubescent self to turn around, go back, do anything else besides descending that staircase. You'll be spared a lot of sleepless nights, I'd say. But of course I didn't know that then. And I may not have listened, even if I had. So instead of turning back, I took a deep breath, gripped the railing, and glared resolutely forward as I began my descent. The wood on the railing was dry and covered with splinters. I immediately let go, holding my hands out for balance as I carefully traversed the staircase. It was, or at least seemed, very long, and with only the dim glow from the string bulb far above me, my heart pounded mercilessly in the darkness. Even kids can sense when something isn't right, I think. They just don't always give a shit. By the time my feet reached the cement floor at the bottom, the light from the bulb above was very nearly a memory. But there was a new light source, and God, I'll never forget it. Directly in front of me was a door, massive, and a deep shade of red. The light was coming from behind the door, and it shone out in thin lines from all four sides, a sinister, dimly glowing rectangle. For the second time, I took a deep breath and went through a door I shouldn't have. In contrast to the dank room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library, the most perfect library imaginable. I gaped in wonder as I stepped, almost reverently, further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly colored titles. Both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my God, the smell, was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice it to say that I've never smelled anything better. Not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never heard of it before? Why was nobody else here? Those were the questions I should have been asking, but I was intoxicated. As I gazed around at all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought: I will never be bored again. In truth, boredom only hid from me for 3 years. It was on my 12th birthday, 63 years ago to this day, that everything changed. Before that day, I visited my basement sanctuary as often as I could, usually several times a week. I never saw another soul down there, yet strangely remained free of suspicion. I never removed a book from that room, but instead would pick up a particular volume wherever I had stopped reading during my previous visit. I sat, always in the same deep purple armchair, and always leaving its twin barren and directly across from myself. That armchair was mine. The other was, well, I suppose I couldn't have articulated it then much better than I can now. But it wasn't mine, that's for damn sure. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mom had invited a couple classmates and some cousins over to our house to celebrate, a gesture which I found more tedious than touching. Really, I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually, our guests went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing time. That didn't matter. The workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure. Knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I read the final words and closed the book. The once exquisite aroma of that room had turned sour. I sat for a moment, unsettled. Objectively, I could recognize that the smell was actually the same as it had been before. That mixture of citrus and pine. I just perceived it differently, and I didn't like it anymore. It was the nasal version of an optical illusion. You know, the one that looks like a young woman glancing backward, but all of a sudden you see that it's really an old woman facing toward you. You can't unsee that, and I couldn't unsmell this. The spell was broken. The odor also seemed, for the first time, to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one title, a large leather-bound cover of solid faded maroon, with one striking black footprint at the top of the spine. This was the source of the smell. I opened the front cover and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood-red ink atop the first page. "Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie." I stared at this sentence, mesmerized, as I began to retreat to my chair. I turned a page, blank. The smell became stronger. Another page, blank, and the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see: my own name. I dropped the book. I began to sprint toward the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leapt to my throat, and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing gray eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit, when I heard the man let out a chuckle. I stared at him disbelievingly. "Who are you?" I asked, panic in my voice. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to my chair. He sat once again in his own. "I fear we got off to a bad start," he said, glancing at the pile of sick on the carpet. "The smell. It does take some getting used to." "Who are you?" I repeated. "Tonight you will know hardship like you've never before known," he said. "I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it and from all other storms which lie ahead." I wanted nothing more than to leave at that moment, but I remained seated. I asked him what he was talking about. "Your mother is dead, my boy, by her own hand in her kitchen. The scene is gruesome, I must admit," he said in sorrowful tones. But was there a playful glint in his eye? "Surely you wish to avoid this path. I can show you a safer one." My blood ran cold at the horrors this man spoke of, but I did not believe him. "What do you want with me?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, an old, raspy yelp that seemed to shake him to his bones. "Nothing but your friendship, dear boy," he said. Then, sensing I found his answer inadequate, he expounded. "I want you to come on a journey with me. My work is noble, and you will make a fine apprentice. And maybe when I'm done," he sighed tiredly, running his bony fingers through his thin white hair, "maybe then, my work can be yours." I stood up, shuffling toward the door, but never breaking his gaze. "You're crazy," I told him. "My mom isn't dead. She's not." "See for yourself if you must," he said, gesturing toward the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed around the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. "Your road won't be easy, friend. If it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever," he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room, "you know where to find me." I slammed the door behind me and took the decrepit stairs 2 at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike, and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying. He must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. To this day, I don't know why she did it. I've lived in that small town in Maine my entire life, although I've kept mostly clear of the public library. Once, in my late 20s, I summoned the courage to step inside. Life was good at that time, and my fear had begun to morph into idle curiosity. Where the door to my basement sanctuary once stood was only a blank wall. I asked the librarian what had become of that basement, though in my heart I knew the answer. There was no basement, she said. There had never been a basement. In fact, if she had her facts correctly, city zoning ordinances prohibited a basement in the area. I've been haunted by that sickly sweet smell, that poisonous blend of citrus and pine, ever since that long ago birthday. When I saw my mother in the kitchen that day, collapsed in a pool of her own blood, I smelled it. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money, and beat me to within an inch of my life when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried our second child, I smelled it, and again when she miscarried our fourth. When our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family Buick, completely shit-faced, and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. I began to smell it periodically as my wife became sick. She died late last year, and now I'm alone for the first time in more than half a century. Now I smell it every day, and it feels like an invitation. A few months ago, I went back to the library and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there, right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past that library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I'm even more frightened to keep living. The old man was right. My road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it will get any easier. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. He promised relief. A refuge, he said. Was he right about that too? There's only one way to find out. After all, I still know where to find him,